I am Lisa Tickle, and yeah, I've got quite the history. I have, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I have, I would say, overcome my childhood abuse, which started in the picture behind me way back when. And so I like to spend a lot of my time. I'll share. I have no problem sharing the abuse. The part that I really like to share is my healing journey and getting that out there to help others. And you'll find me on YouTube, and that is my podcast, which is Healing and Growing Hand in Hand. I'm on Instagram, which is, I believe, Lisa M. Tickle. I'm on TikTok, which is Lisa Tickle. I'm on Facebook, not real big onto Facebook, but those are the other medias. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lisa Tickle. So that's the way you can reach out to me. And then I guess at the end, I can share a great little announcement that I've got coming up that I'm very excited about.
That's exciting news. I look forward to that announcement that you can mention in a little bit. But take us right from the beginning. What type of abuse and trauma did you experience, which led you to do the work that you do, as well as your healing journey?
So my abuse was everything but sexual, fortunately. I guess there's a whole nother dynamic when it comes to the sexual abuse as opposed to the others. And so mine started, like I said, as far back as I can remember. It really started with my brother. My brother was adopted. He's 7 years older than me. And I honestly don't remember ever having a good time with him when I was little. I remember seeing videos of us when we were little. I was about 4 years old, and he was actually playing with me. And it seems so foreign to me, to see us playing together. So interesting. But his was a lot of verbal, emotional, and physical abuse. And at a really young age for him, I believe around 11 or 12, he actually started doing drugs. And we're talking heavy duty drugs. We're not talking just marijuana. We're talking mind altering drugs, which only took the situation and made it worse. So you took someone who was already unstable and it became worse. And I seemed to be the one that he liked to take the abuse out on. It took me a long time to figure this part out, but my parents' responsibility in this is my father never protected me. He was actually afraid of my brother. And when my brother was 13, I witnessed the power change where my dad went in to spank him with the paddle and my brother took the paddle out of his hand. So I saw the dynamic change there. My mom, and then what happened when I was around 11 or 12, I started putting on weight because I started emotionally eating. I didn't understand at the time what was going on, but that's what was going on. I was emotionally eating, putting on weight. I was very active. I was always playing and roller skating. So, it was interesting. And then, of course, with my mother, I was this pretty little girl that she just loved to dress up. Easter was a big deal because she would take me out and we'd buy a whole new outfit, and she loved doing that. Well, when I started turning 11, 12, and I started putting weight on, I'm not that cute little girl anymore. And she became very vicious and, threatened, like, for example, threatened to not buy me any clothes until I lose weight. I had no idea how to lose weight. I didn't know how I was gaining weight. I didn't understand. So there was that kind of mentality going on. Then when I was around 14, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. And then 2 years later, I lost her, which is traumatic. But what to add the trauma to that trauma is my parents never told me she was dying. And I didn't find out until literally 3 days before she died that she was actually dying. I thought she was going to get better, and I was actually very involved in her care. So I see her look like maybe getting better, and I'm thinking she's going to do great. And then she didn't. And then my world really fell apart after that because my dad completely shut down. He became severely depressed about this. All the adults in my life disappeared, including family. And so I just remember sitting on my friend's bed when I was right after my mom died and thought, whose mom dies at 16? Like, how does this happen? This is crazy, and just like, because this, again, I got told 3 days before that she was dying. I had no idea. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all this. And then she dies. She really does die. And whose mom does this? And just remember thinking, well, I guess I just have to move on. And so I tried. And that's probably the worst thing you can do. But again, even at school, I didn't get support. Counselors, teachers, so I had to manage that whole childhood abuse and losing your mother. I had to navigate that on my own. And I was aware at the time that I had been through abuse, because I even thought at one point maybe not having children because I was afraid I was going to pass it on. But I made a commitment, and God was blessed me with a beautiful son, and he was not abused, but it was definitely a consideration. But at 19 was when I realized that there was something going on with me. I could tell that I was in a lot of pain, um, but I didn't know exactly what was going on. So that's where I started my healing journey at 19. But again, back then there wasn't a lot out there. There wasn't trauma therapy. Didn't even know a lot about trauma. And so I just kind of fumbled through, and I did some growing, but I spent the majority, like I mentioned earlier, majority of my adult life completely in survival mode. And what that is like is you're on constant alert. You're always looking for something to go wrong. That is what your mindset is you are looking for something to go wrong so you can fix it before it turns into something bigger. So imagine always being anxious and just, I guess, overwhelmed a lot of times. And then if something does happen, you know, it's real easy to lose complete control, which I lived with that for many, many years. And it's interesting because I went from one type of family and I married into a very similar type of family. They were not directly abusive with me per se, but there was a lot of the same kind of mindset thinking. And I stayed with that husband for 25. We were married for 25 years. And it was a really rough marriage. And the reason why I'm kind of going through this is what my abuse did. I made some choices in my life, including in relationships that weren't healthy. And it's not that they were bad people, it's just unhealthy people come together, right? So, yeah, just like healthy people come together. And so, and I don't like to disparage my ex husband at all, because we were both a mess coming together, really. And I got out of that. The one thing that was told to me by my brother when I was about 11, and this will really explain a lot about the choices I made in relationships, is, and I 100% believed it, is he told me that nobody loved me, that all the family, friends, and everybody, nobody liked me. Not only did they not like me, they didn't love me. And he told me as so matter of factly, it was like the conversation we're having here, very calm. And I just remember being like my chest, like someone punched me in the chest. I was so devastated. And I believed him 100%. So imagine taking that into your adult life. So I was always on the hunt to find somebody that loves me, right? And I have to have somebody that loves me. So I got out of that marriage and I got right into another relationship because, again, I had to find that, I had to fill that void in me, and I was doing the wrong thing. That ended up being, after I married him, and I did marry him quickly, it was a very narcissistic relationship. I didn't know what the term was at the time, but I knew, excuse me, I'd gone through enough healing that I knew his behavior was really bizarre. And he didn't show the behavior until after we got married. And we were married for just over a year and a half, and he unfortunately passed from cancer. And then I did a deep dive. I did a deep dive within myself and said, okay, I've been making some choices here that are not healthy, and I'm the common denominator. What do I need to do to change that? And so at this point, there's more trauma therapy out there. There's EMDR, which I have done, and which is fabulous, and it has really helped a lot. And I just did some really deep soul searching and did a lot of reading and just looking deep within and understanding more and more about myself and about my past. And the one thing that is really in doing my podcast, I've done so much research on trauma and the education, what it has done for me, and learning about trauma, learning about abuse and how it affects us, has been able to allow me to separate my identity from, I'm not a victim. I can separate it. There's a space between me and my behavior now. And now I understand my behavior. I can forgive myself for my behavior, change my behavior, and feel so empowered. Instead of feeling helpless like I felt before, that I was just going through life and doing this stuff because I just couldn't help it, which was very frustrating. I took my power back. And I'm responsible 100% for what I do and what I don't do, how I respond, how I react. And that's been really empowering. And so that's a very Reader's Digest version of my story.
I like it because you mentioned a number of things that people can learn from, right? Like you mentioned being stuck in the victim mentality because a lot of people are trapped
Mhm.
in it because it's comfortable. It's like that old sweater out of your
Yes.
closet, right? Makes you feel
Yeah.
good, doesn't matter how beaten and worn it is. And then there's also something else you mentioned is that you took back your power. I know a lot of people when they feel powerless, they feel isolated because they feel isolated, they sit in their feelings, and because they sit in their
Yep.
feelings and sometimes their thoughts, it leads them to do things that they look back, they're like, oh my God, did I
Yes.
actually do that? I remember someone
Yes.
told me a story. They began to soothe themselves by bringing chaos into other people's
Yep.
lives. So, what they would do is they would put on this mask that they're healed, that they're healthy, and
Correct.
then find these people and I don't want to say wreak havoc, but what they would do is they would disrupt their lives. And sometimes a lot of people that are healed, they want to heal other people because they know what it's like to not be healed,
Exactly.
right? Like, did you find
Exactly. Yep.
yourself trying to figure out, okay, this is my healing journey, but I want to make sure that I'm not damaging other people along the way?
Yes, yes, that is one. Yeah, when I realized I was doing that, because you mentioned something really interesting. When I was in survival mode, and when you get, I call when you get squeezed, you'll do things that you wouldn't normally do. There were things that I did in survival mode that I wouldn't do outside of survival mode, and that's the things that I had to forgive myself for, right? But yes, I mean, helping others has been, I didn't realize, but it really is a passion of mine because I know what it's like to suffer like that. And I also know the statistics. I also know that most people who suffer from childhood abuse don't even mention it for 30 to 40 years. That's a long time to suffer, long time to suffer. And so, yeah, if we can shorten people's suffering and get that, because you can heal from trauma, you can absolutely heal and manage trauma so that it no longer affects your life. I know my life is better now than it would have been probably if I didn't have the abuse. That sounds crazy, but the journey that I went on and what I have learned out of that and the growth and the strength that I have in me, I wouldn't know if I had it or not.
Like, this Lisa is carved in the fires, whereas before
Yeah.
she didn't have that, she didn't have that desire or that passion or maybe that situation to create the person that you have now. It's very interesting how you have people that will be coaches, therapists, mentors, whatever title you want to give them, right? When you
Right.
ask them why they got into it, they'll point to a trauma that they had.
Yeah, they call it post-trauma healing. That's what they call it, post-trauma healing. And there's so many of them I've ran into, and I just find it wonderful that they want to pay it forward. They want to help. They've gone through their journey, they figured out what worked for them, and they want to get it out there for others.
Yeah, so I wonder, and this is not saying that everyone should go through something in the world today,
No,
right?
we're all kind of going through
No,
something right
right? You know
now.
what I mean? Could you imagine? Okay, every single person, by the time you're born, you're five, we have to just give you childhood trauma so you're a better person as an adult. No. But what I do like is that I like that there's a lot of people out there who are paying it forward and making sure that it's not being repeated. And better yet, when people who are victims of childhood abuse, I'm glad to see that they make sure that they're not repeating it and putting their children through it. Because I know there's a lot of people, and I spoke to a lot of parents on my podcast who they've caught themselves like, oh my God,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
became my mom and dad to my child. And because they have the tools in their adulthood, they're able to at least see it. But then they realize how easy it can be for someone to fall into that trauma
correct.
just like how their parents were. And to be honest, I know you're a little bit older than me. Like, there's a generation out there that talking about these things wasn't something that was necessarily done. It was more
Oh,
so,
no.
you don't talk about this. It's just a way of life. It's like being bullied in school. It's just a
Yeah,
passage of
exactly.
your adulthood, right? Like, so when you're on your healing journey, do you see that being a stumbling block for the people who want to do better because they're still holding on to the trauma because maybe they're grieving over the person that they have to let go because they're no longer that person anymore. Now they're becoming a new, hopefully improved version of themselves.
Well, there's that. And there's also people who don't even realize they've been abused. That sounds weird, But it's interesting because that happened to me. For so many years, right? For generations after generations, behavior was acceptable and wasn't considered abuse. And now we're seeing that it's abuse. And so people and adults are now looking back and going, oh, that's abuse, because there's not a clear outline exactly of what is considered abuse. We're just now starting to put that together. So you've got that reality of people not realizing that there's abuse. Here's an example. I used to do and I'm resurrecting it, but I used to do a workshop for women healing from childhood abuse. And I had a friend come to me, and she was going to come and bring a friend of hers, and she was going to attend the workshop as support for her friend. She said, my background is my mom and dad were both alcoholics, but they were fun. Like, it was fun. They weren't mean or anything. So, I wasn't abused. Well, yes, because an alcoholic parent cannot meet your needs. They can't. They're just not able to. So she didn't even realize until she took the workshop that she actually had gone through abuse. So you've got that, right? And then you do have people that, and this is a lot of times I have found in my experience when they're in the victim mindset, that it's almost becomes their identity and they don't want to let it go. It's that weird, comfortably uncomfortable, I call it. And they don't want to let that go. And I had one woman in my workshop that actually was the only person that we had to ask to go back to counseling, because she wanted to absolutely stay in the victim mindset. She wanted to stay and just tell stories and tell stories and tell stories. She didn't want to move past them. So trauma, and they have proved this scientifically, it changes your brain. It changes the way you think. It changes your perception.
It's scary. It's scary to
It is
see
scary.
that if I was someone that went through, actually, I'm going to take it away from me. There's someone that I know that she was abused in a marriage. I don't know if she was abused as a child, but in a marriage. She has taken on the persona of that, whereas everything that she does in her life, she relates back to it. Someone asked her a question: who were you before the trauma or before this
Mm-mm.
abuse? And she doesn't remember.
Mm-mm.
I asked her, who do you want to be after you let this go?
Ooh.
And then she was like, I don't want to let it go.
Yeah. Yes. That has become her identity. That is so sad. She doesn't know who she is. And I experienced that because it was in 2016 was when I realized I don't know who I am. I don't know what I like. I don't know. Honest to God, I was so busy all my life being a chameleon. I would meet you and I'd try to assess you and figure out what you expect from me so that I could change myself so that you would accept me. And so in 2016 was when I remember laying on my bed crying, just like I don't know who I am. And my husband, and my now husband, he was my boyfriend then, was like, well, let's go on an adventure. Let's find her. And so we did. And so I had to find my identity, which is my values, my standards. What do I like? What do I don't like? What's acceptable? And I finally got my voice back too. But there's something to that, and I don't quite understand it, even though I did it myself. But there is something to that. It's like, I guess you don't want to let it go because you don't know who you really are, and kind of frightening to find out who you are. What if you find out you're not this great person, or what if all those lies that you're believing are true?
What if you're not a good person?
Exactly. Then you have to face that. Right now, you don't have to face that. But the truth is, you are a good person. Like, it, and finding who you are it was critical to my healing.
I wonder sometimes, because we live in the age where you can post whatever it is you want to post on social media. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
invention, right?
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that plays into staying in the abused identity, because if I'm abused 50 years ago outside of my family, my support system for the most part would be within my family or maybe an extended family member, right? So maybe let's say four or five, no more than 10 people. If I'm abused today, I can just make something online and I have thousands, tens of thousands of people
Yeah.
running to my aid, running to my support, whether the abuse is true or not. Let's say it's true,
Right.
right? Or wrong, indifferent, or otherwise. I wonder how much that plays into it because uh, some of the women that I've spoke to who have been traumatized because I work with a charity group of abused women, some of them wanted attention immediately.
Mhm.
And you have now where you can go online and you can get that attention
Mhm.
immediately. So I wonder how much that plays a part in maybe staying stuck in that
Yes.
abused identity.
I have found in my experience in work, especially with women who've been sexually abused as children, that that is really common. And, and it's really common for them to be promiscuous as well, um, unfortunately. And I think with part of that is, their sexuality was affected when they were so young. And imagine, what your brain does is so crazy when this stuff happens. It makes no sense whatsoever. But it's almost like, oh, well, that's where my value is in how I look and how I can get attention. And think how powerful that is. If you can walk into a room and you're a beautiful woman and you can have everybody, including women, turn around and look at you, that's very powerful for that moment, for that moment. But yes, you do get stuck. Absolutely. And think about that because I wasn't quite to that extreme, but I've always been very careful about my looks because of the way I was raised. I realize it now. Like I didn't understand for so many years why I was so paranoid about my looks. But that's why, is because I was raised with, well, you got to be this pretty, beautiful little girl. Perfect. I mean, my mom went all out, little hat, little gloves, everything.
There was that's actually fun. It's like she's like dressing you up and making you appear to be something that maybe deep down you didn't think you were.
Yep. Bingo.
When you mentioned the sexual trauma, I'll share a story. There's someone who she experienced sexual trauma since we're on that topic, and what she did, because you mentioned that they're promiscuous, she became very promiscuous.
Yeah.
Her abuser looked a certain type of way. So what she did to regain her power is that she would go out and have very dominating or in some cases abusive sexual experiences with those people, unbeknownst to them, right? So that was her way of trying to get back the power because let's say a man that is 6 foot and he looks a certain way, he has black hair, brown hair, blonde hair. I'm gonna go out and find men that are similar to my abuser,
Yes. Yep.
and I'm going to quote unquote dominate them in the way that I
Yep.
was dominated, conquer them in the way I was conquered. And she did
Yeah.
this so often that even when she was married, she continued it.
That doesn't surprise me.
So how do you have conversation with someone like that where it's to the point where okay, they're now doing something that is negatively impacting themselves, right? Because that is damaging to yourself to be promiscuous that way because you're reckless in that way as
Yeah.
well, right?
Oh, yeah. It's very dangerous.
Right? But now you're doing it inside a relationship where you're impacting this person
Mhm.
who has no idea of what's going on, and maybe for the most part they're innocent to what you're going through or what
Right.
they're going through.
I mean, that is where therapy needs to be put in. There's some deep, that's at the beginning of your healing. And that goes really deep. That's why, and I said it so many times, traditional therapy doesn't help with this. You need trauma therapy. You need some kind of modality because there is stuff trapped in her subconscious, and that's why she's doing the things that she's done. There's trauma stored in her body, and all of that needs to come out. And that's not through regular talk therapy. And even I do coaching. That's above my pay grade. That definitely needs, yeah, it's above my pay grade. I can, once you've got your healing journey going and you've gone through some, therapy, then I can step in. But she really needs some deep therapy because what she's doing is very destructive. I mean, it's very dangerous what she could do. So many things can go wrong, right? So she definitely needs to go into some type of trauma therapy to get some of that worked out. And I'm telling you, the thing that's amazing is some of the trauma therapy can take a little time. I'm talking months. but you've been living with this stuff for years, you know? And so invest in yourself and, spend some months getting in there. But that definitely, she needs some deep therapy with that.
I agree. I suggested therapy to her. This was years ago, and I even said this is when I was starting working with women who went through something similar. And I said, and I offered to say, hey, I can work with you to go through with it.
Yeah,
But
support
it
her.
was yes, yes. But what I found, and maybe you've gone through this because you have your own healing journey. I found working with people you don't know is vastly different than working with people you do know.
So true. So, so true. It's hard to hear the stories no matter who it is, but when it's somebody that you care about, it's really hard to sit and hear the stories and just watch them suffer. It's really hard. And, the frustrating part is they need to work on it themselves. They need to take the steps. And you're right. What you can do is come along and support her and encourage her, but she's the one that has to make that decision. And when they don't make the decision, when they choose not to, it is so hard to watch. I've watched lives being ruined because of that. And it's so frustrating because I want to just walk up and kind of shake them a little and just, it sounds, going through your healing, and I use this metaphor a lot, is like spring cleaning, right? You're going to get in there, you're going to pull everything out of the cupboards. It's all going to be this, you're going to turn around, there's going to be this big mess behind you because you pulled everything out of the cupboards. And then you sort through this stuff and you decide what you're going to keep and you neatly put it back. But that time when you're in that spring cleaning is painful. I will say it's painful. It is not easy. But that's why it's important, like you having, being supportive of her. We need to have a support system around us. We need to have a really good trauma therapist, and we need to have a good support system around us. And you'll get through it. But it's not easy. And for someone who has never done their healing, and that may be her, and have never, I call it, tasted like that freedom, you don't know what that's like. But once you have a little measure of healing and you feel that and it feels so good, that's what motivates you. It's just getting them over that hump of getting that first little measure of healing that motivates them. Does that make sense?
It does, and the difficulty would be in that is, as I think you mentioned this earlier, is if you don't know you're suffering, or if you don't know you're being abused or damaged,
Right.
it's hard to take that first step. And sometimes there's some people who have been abused, and maybe you've seen this, and their life is okay afterwards. They may need help,
Mm-hmm.
but they're like, okay, I can handle my life being this way as bad as it is, right? Because they've soothed themselves to say, okay, this is a new baseline.
Right. It's their new normal.
It's their new normal, right? Like I'm causing chaos, I don't have peace, but I'm okay with it because I have a car, I have a house.
Yeah, they don't see that they're doing anything. They don't see these big traumatic things in their life anymore. So they think it's not. I have people in my life that are there, and they don't realize that the trauma that they experienced was really bad, and they have success in their life. They have success and they're good people. They're not bad people. They don't act out the way I did, you know. And yet, so they're just like, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Imagine what their life would be like though, if they did go deeper and do some healing. Wow.
Yeah, someone told me that they were fine and they're still committing like physical acts, right? Like they're still damaging things, still damaging property. And they were so like, no, I'm fine. I can handle this. I'm like, but you're being not only verbally destructive, now you're physically destructive,
Ooh.
right?
A lot of blind spots.
I think so. And I mentioned to him, I was like, what would happen if you're in a relationship with a woman and you have one of those outbursts? Women in general, not as strong, not as physically big as a man, right? I told him that is the concern. The concern is fine, you're okay with the chaos in your life, And to be between you and me, Lisa, if someone is destroying their life, I rather them do that than destroy someone else's life,
Absolutely. Yeah, I
right?
agree. I agree.
Right?
Mhm.
But now you're impacting, right? And if you were to bring someone into your life, it's not like you can turn on and off your trauma triggers or how you lash
No.
out to the trauma. So take us through your healing journey because you described um how you went through a lot of things and maybe what you went through can help the people like the ones I gave the example to or other people who know someone because I believe we all know someone that needs the help but they're a little bit reluctant because as you mentioned they have certain successes in their life which masks what they really need.
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing that was enlightening for me really is getting self-awareness because what that did is it helped me become aware of my triggers. Because what you're describing with your this guy is what's scary in that case. What came to me is, what if he gets triggered? If he's in that situation and he gets triggered, because these triggers come out of nowhere and they don't make any sense. I could stand here and get triggered over something, and you're looking at me going, what's going on, right? Because it doesn't trigger you. And so for me, that was really big because when I was in survival mode, I was constantly being triggered. It didn't take much at all to trigger me. And so I was constantly, it was interesting. I was constantly upset. I was constantly tight, constantly so tight all the time that even when I would just pick up my phone, when my ex-husband would call me, he would say, "Did you just run to the phone because of my breathing?" Because I was just so tight all the time. And so I am a believer in the first thing that helped me on my healing journey was being self-aware and learning self-awareness about myself. And because I would what was disturbing to me is I didn't realize I was being triggered. I would act out and I'm watching these people look at me like I'm crazy. So imagine that you're losing control of your behavior and it's not okay, but you can't stop it. And then you're looking at people who are looking at you like you're nuts, which just escalates the trigger, right? It's awful. Um, and so getting the self awareness helps you catch all of that. It makes you pay attention to your own behavior as well as others so that you can start managing yourself much better. And I have shared this story on my podcast, but it was it was over a year ago. For the first time, I walked through a trigger for the first time from the beginning to the end. And it was almost like an out of body experience where I was watching myself. And it was so empowering. I got to witness myself get triggered. I got to witness myself shut my mouth and not react and take a long pause. And then I was in a safe place with my husband, and I could this is where I realized I was being triggered. I was just starting to spout off, and it was not making any sense what was going on in my head. And then I realized I was being triggered. And when I get triggered, I want to self sabotage. So I stopped the situation and I realized it. And it was really empowering because, like I said, it was almost like I was above watching myself. And I found out the root reason why I was triggered, which we're triggered for a reason. It's not just we wake up one day and we're just triggered for no reason. I found the root reason why I was triggered. So that trigger is no longer part of my life. I literally walked through it, saw what it was, made a good decision out of it, understood why I was triggered, and went and took care of what I needed to take care of.
So your
So,
reaction to your triggers was self-sabotage. So yours was inward, it wasn't outward.
correct. It was always inward, always, always inward. I mean, I might, back in the day, I used to joke about this. It's not funny, but I used to be able to shred people with my tongue. My ex husband was like, you can write a letter to make a grown man cry, you know. So I learned a long time ago to quit doing that because I hated cleaning up that mess. But then it went inward. It went inward, and it was something that I was going to do that was going to damage myself.
Yeah, then you have the people who are outward and like the example with this guy, they want to sue
Mm-hmm.
themselves by hurting other people.
Right.
That's where the danger is, was as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
many times we can be triggered and it's not intentional.
No, no, the trigger that I went through was completely out of the blue. And I'll tell you what it was because it was really interesting. I was visiting family, my son and my daughter-in-law, and I was staying at my daughter-in-law's parents' house, and they have a cat. And the cat is he's a piece of work. I love him, but he bit me. He just sometimes he gets moody and for no reason he'll bite you. Well, he bit me on the hand. And I knew, and he bit me hard, and I knew, right? But it was in the morning, and I was like, I don't really feel like dealing with it. And my husband kept saying, we need to go to urgent care. No, no, no. So here's where I got triggered. So I meet up with my son and my daughter-in-law, and all my daughter-in-law said was, oh, well, that's interesting. Because I said I was going to go to urgent care later. And she says, oh, well, that's interesting. And my dad gets bit all the time and he doesn't go to urgent care. That doesn't, what, does that sound bad? No, there's nothing wrong with that. Here's what I heard. And it took me back to my trigger of my childhood. And that was, oh, fine. You're not really hurt that bad. You're making a big deal about it. You don't need to go to the doctor, right? And so I realized I was getting triggered at that moment. And I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to say what was on my mind because it was not okay. And so we go and have lunch. And then afterwards, my husband says to me, we're alone in the car. He's like, are we going to urgent care? And that's when I spouted off. I was in a same safe place. No, I tell you what, that's just fine. I'm not going to go and we'll see if my hand gets infected. I'll show them that. I mean, just the crazy stuff that goes in your mind, right? So I wasn't going to go to urgent care because I was going to show them that, oh, you don't think it's going to get infected? Fine, I'll show you. I mean, that's how far I went, right? And as I'm saying this stuff that's coming out of my head that sounds so crazy, that's when I looked at my husband and he was so sweet. He was just driving, just smiling. And I said, well, clearly I'm being triggered. Let's go to urgent care. And the root of it came from my childhood of my mother not believing me ever when I was sick.
The
That's where it came
perception
from.
of our, yeah, the perception of our mind versus reality of our eyes,
Exactly.
right? We
Exactly.
think it, and then we're like, okay, we have a situation, we interpret it in a way that isn't correct, and then we build up in our mind, and then okay, this is the reality. And then when
Yeah.
you're triggered and you respond, some people are going to look at you, like you mentioned, like, what is, they're a little confused now because we're upset over something that didn't necessarily happen in reality,
Makes
but in our
no sense.
mind, that's how we interpreted what they said or even the situation.
Well, and the difference with a trigger too is you're actually reliving it. You're not just remembering. That's why it hits you so hard is you're actually reliving it because it was at that moment it was my mom sitting across from me telling me that I'm making a big deal out of a cat bite and that I need to just knock it off. That's what I was reliving. But the reality was it was my daughter-in-law just making a comment, a very innocent comment that there was nothing wrong with what she said. But to me, it was my mom telling me that I was being a baby and stop, it's no big deal. You just got a cat bite.
It was taking you back to a situation that maybe you didn't get the closure that you wanted on it.
Exactly, exactly. Because there was a lot of times, where that affected me. And I actually had physical problems because my mom wouldn't take me to the doctor.
So how have you resolved that now, if you've resolved it now?
So that particular trigger, yeah, being, walking through that trigger is what caused me to, and being aware of it and recognizing where it came from, it has no more hold on me at all. I see that one coming before I even let it turn into a trigger. That's what happened there. And that's the self-awareness is paying attention to what's going on up here, what you're thinking on, what you're saying, what you're feeling because all your body is so smart and it's going to tell you when something's off. And if you pay attention and you just look into that, you're going to be able to resolve so many situations before they turn into what I went through that day. But I needed to go through that. I really needed to go through that. And I've used that example a lot on my podcast and have helped many others with it. It's just, it was so empowering. It was not fun to go through. Triggers are not fun to go through, but what came out of it was powerful.
One of my triggers earlier on, because I grew up without my mother or my father, was I always felt like a sense of abandonment. So if there
Yeah.
was someone close to me and they would just get up and leave and I didn't hear from them, or like they would not be my friend, or they would just end whatever
Mm-hmm.
the romantic relationship, friendship, whatever, I would be triggered. I'd be upset because I experienced that as a child. And I always grew up thinking that people know how they should treat people, but I had to
I know.
learn to express
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
wanted from people. And it's one thing if I were to say, "Hey Lisa, this is I'm going through something and I need your help. I need you to be supportive of me like this." Now, if you don't do that, then I can feel how I feel, right? But if I'm going through something and I say, "Hey Lisa, I'm going through something," and you don't support me in the way that I think that you should support me because we didn't have that conversation, then it's me because I didn't
Right.
convey that, right?
Right.
And that's what I had to go earlier on because there was times, even up until this day, where I need support from certain people, and I would tell them, "Hey, I need your support like
Yeah.
this." Now, if they disappoint me, then that is strictly on the dynamic between me and that person,
Right.
right? Because I had to learn to stop assuming, because I think a lot of people growing up,
Yes.
they assume that they're my mom and my dad. How can they not be there for me? They're my uncle, they're my aunt. How they cannot be there? They're
Right.
my friend, they're my husband, they're my wife. But some people, unfortunately, because they're going through what they're going through, they have no idea how to help other
Right.
people.
Right. I mean, we're the product of our environment, right? How we grew up, and what my normal is different than what your normal is. And there is a lot of, expectations that we have of others. And I remember, I remember this, and this is sometimes embarrassing to mention, but I can remember my mindset way back, like young adult, that in my head, in the back of my mind, I had the mindset that, look, I was abused, so you need to be nice to me. I literally thought like that and really expected people to be nice to me. I can behave how I want, but you need to be nice to me because I grew up with this abuse. So you need to be nice to me. And when I think back on that, I'm like, oh gosh, the things that my behavior, just having that mindset. But we have expectations. And that is, I'm really glad you brought that up because we do need to communicate. We do need to say to people, we can't expect people to know what's going on with us and when we need support and when we need them. We need to express that.
Yeah, I've told people that I need your support because I'm going through X. If
Right.
they don't support me, then I'm upset because of their behavior, which is a lack of
Correct.
support. But
Right.
I can't be going through something, sit in my ivory tower with my arms crossed like a child, and be like, "Oh, why aren't my friends calling me?" No one
Right.
knows what I'm
Exactly.
going through, right?
Exactly. And I was really private about my stuff. And so much of mine was shame. I mean, the shame just shut my voice down in a heartbeat. And I had a lot of disappointments because I thought, well, how come people aren't, helping me? I don't understand. They didn't know. They didn't know. And even if they did know, people have lives too. And when you need support, you do need to tell people. You're right. You're absolutely right. Sometimes I just need a minute, right? Like I'm feeling overwhelmed or what, and I say it because I've learned that if I just would have walked away, it's going to hurt someone's feelings, right? They're not going to know why I'm walking away. So now I say, hey, I need a minute. I just need a minute. So just give me a minute. I'm going to step away. I need a minute. We need to tell people what we need.
Yes, yes. And I hope people can truly understand that, right? And what I would want in an ideal world, Lisa, is anytime, ladies and gentlemen, you're going through something, please, as a first step, take a moment for you.
Yes.
Understand the feelings, right? Okay, I'm feeling this type of emotion. And then go to the person, unless they've shown you otherwise, that you're in a relationship with. Go to your husband, go to your wife, and say, "This is what I'm going through. I
Mhm.
need you in this way." Right. And then if you want to go outside, go outside. But my biggest concern is, and I feel bad for the people that go through this because then they communicate that, well, I didn't want this person to reach out. When you put it online, you don't control who gets to see it, and you're giving everyone access to you,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
right? Good, bad,
Yeah.
or indifferent. So
Yeah.
you
So
can't
true.
say if you have 1,000 people that you're friends with online, you're like, okay, I'm saying this for 10 of them. It doesn't work that way.
No.
Right. Especially when you're going through something, people are like, oh my God, Train's going through this. Oh my goodness, Lisa's going through that. They're going to tell the people, did you hear what Lisa wrote online? She said that she was going through here. Oh, do you see what Train? He's going through this. So now you have all these people who know your business and they may not have the best of intentions. There's one person,
Yeah.
he shared online. and he was going through something with his wife, I believe, his marriage. I think she did something and he was feeling a certain type of way. And there was a woman who wanted to, she was very nice. She says, "Oh, you know what? If you ever want to talk, things of that nature." And it turns out that she had ulterior motives.
Hmm.
So now when he was going to be supported by her, that was her way of getting in. So now you have someone who is grieving. They're being seduced in a way.
Yeah.
They're not in their right mind,
Right.
right? And now it potentially could have been this big situation because the partner is already feeling bad because they've hurt you. Now you're in with another woman.
That's what
Now you have
happens.
that dynamic, right? So do you see
Mhm.
that side as well, where maybe
Mhm.
the person they go to actually does damage to the relationship?
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, that's so common. There's collateral damage when it comes to unhealed trauma. It's not just the person that's being affected, but anybody that loves that person that's going to be affected. And that's a great example of the guy got squeezed, right? He's squeezed. So he had pressure, he had situations happening to him, and he made a bad choice in that situation. And I bet if he wasn't in that situation, he would never consider talking to another woman, right? That's a great example. That's a great example. And that happens a lot. You know, I cringe at some of the choices that I made in the past because of where I was at. I understand now why I did it. Um, it doesn't take away the consequences that happen from making poor choices. I know that I had a lot of God's grace on me and kept me from getting in a lot more trouble than I should have, honestly. Um, but that's very common that you're gonna, when you are not healed from trauma and it just messes with your mind so much, you're going to make bad choices that are going to affect others. And you're going to have people that are going to take advantage of those situations. And putting yourself online, yeah, that's a possibility.
How can we protect ourselves from those situations? Because everyone is going to go through likely a traumatic situation or a traumatic experience, but to be in that situation, I couldn't imagine if I was married and my wife and I did something that upset my wife and she went to another man to have that conversation and then that man turns out to be someone that has desires or made
Right.
the situation awkward. Like, how do we protect ourselves from that?
Well, that's why it's really important to be in therapy. I can't say that enough. In the right therapy, getting the right therapist. So if it's trauma, getting yourself a trauma therapist. You've got to get in there because we behave the way we do for a reason. People don't wake up one day and just act out for no reason. Kids don't wake up one day and just start acting out for no reason. We behave the way we behave for a reason. And so you do have to set up a lot of things to protect yourself. I mean, frankly, if I was in that situation, it's real easy to say, don't have the conversation with the woman. Don't, men shouldn't counsel women, and in my opinion, right? And vice versa, because that stuff happens. You're going deep and you're being vulnerable, right? And so in that case, I mean, so it sounds like he went online to get support, right? Is that what he did? That's your first mistake. That's the first mistake. To go online and expect that you're going to get support from online. No, 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 no. I do it different, right? I have a support system around me. I have a therapist. I have a support system around me. I go online and I put my business out there, but I put my business out there hoping that it's going to help someone. And I've had people try to reach out to me, and I no, I don't need your help. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I do have a lot of men that reach out to me. Thank you. I just don't do it. I put my stuff out there for a different reason. I'm not putting my stuff out there to get support. That's your first mistake. You're not going to get the right support from online. This is what exactly what can happen.
I think that's the major issue. I wouldn't go online with my like I coach the opposite sex. Yes, most of the people I coach
Right,
through this
right.
is women, but I wouldn't ask and many of them actually are either in a long-term relationship or married. I wouldn't ask them to come over to my house at 11 p.m. to be counseled.
Oh,
Right, but it's interesting, and we talked about this at the beginning, right? Like you begin to do things that you wouldn't normally do
yes.
when you're going through it. Like any other day of the week, you wouldn't be at an at the home of the opposite sex at that time,
Right,
right? But
right.
you're going through the
You
trauma
know
and you
something's
think
going to
it's,
happen.
yeah, and you're going through the trauma, and for some reason you think it's appropriate because you're blinded by, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get help. It sounds like
Yep. And you want to
the
feel
person that
good.
you want to feel good, right? It sounds like that joke where someone says, well, I'm only inviting this person over for tea and conversation at 11 p.m.
Yeah. No, you definitely have an ulterior motive with that. Nobody drinks tea at 11 o'clock at night.
Yes, yes, the caffeine will keep you up, wink, wink, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's interesting how people can fall into that because you're
Yeah.
compromising yourself in one way. You want the attention. You want to be soothed by whomever, and who better than someone that maybe they were helpful in some type of way, or maybe you're like,
Mhm.
okay, this person is just being friendly. That's why I always said
Right.
start with yourself, start with your partner, because that's part of being in a relationship with someone. I
Mhm.
couldn't imagine being married and I can't go to my partner when I have an issue, especially with them. I'm like, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I didn't like how you spoke to me today. Can we have a conversation? Why would I automatically go online and then subsequently
Exactly.
into the arms of someone else?
Exactly. Exactly. Some things are just need to be kept private. And it's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with, like, after you resolve that problem, sharing that online if you're in that arena. But when you're in the middle of it, the last place you need to go is online and look for support. You need to sometimes that's when you actually need to pull away from online, and start really looking within yourself and working on it. Yeah, I can't imagine uh in this situation that I have now. I mean, I do go to my husband. Outside of therapy, he's my first safe place.
Agreed, agreed. And you have to give the person the opportunity to protect you.
Right, exactly, exactly. And sometimes you even need to share with them what it is your needs are. Like what because if you just say, "Well, I need you to support me," well, what does that mean? Right? Because your idea might be, "Oh, I'm calling you every day and checking on you," and my idea might be, something completely different. And so that's why, that was one thing that's really interesting is I didn't have a voice for years until 2016. And it was interesting, and I think that we tend to do this. I think that a lot of survivors deal with this, and I didn't even realize I didn't have a voice. There were times I would talk to my one girlfriend and I wouldn't finish a sentence or I wouldn't finish a story, and she'd just look at me. And it hit me one day when I was sitting there talking with my now husband. We're in the car, we're just having a conversation, normal conversation, and I went to say something and it wouldn't come out. He looked at me and said, "Well, are you going to finish your sentence?" And I'm like, "It won't come out." He's like, "No, just say it." And I'm like, "No, it won't come out." It was literally stuck right here. And he goes, "Okay, well, let's look into this. Like, let's figure it out." And so that's when I realized, oh, I don't have a voice. I've gotten my voice back. And what's interesting is, so that was in 2016, right? So probably about a year ago, my husband and I were having a discussion, and we don't fight. Like, we have conversations sometimes. And there was something, and I wasn't feeling comfortable, and I was feeling myself triggered. So I said, I'm just going to go in the bathroom. I'm going to brush my teeth. I just need a minute. And this is so weird. As I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I literally felt like something was squeezing my throat. It hurt. My entire throat, my entire neck hurt so bad. And when I was in there, I was ruminating about what we were talking about, and I didn't have an answer. That's why I needed to step away. I finally got my answer when I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, but my throat started hurting. I knew I needed to go say it right now. So I finished brushing my teeth and I walked out there. And as soon as I started to open my mouth, I said, "I have something I need to say." He says, "Okay." And my neck just loosened up and I was able to say what I needed to say. Isn't that interesting?
I love that.
It was so, I'm not kidding. I've never experienced anything quite like that. Before this, the voice just wouldn't come out. This one was my body. I guess I was trying to hold it in. My body was saying no.
And then you had someone that was there that could help you
Yes, he's my safe
through
space
that.
and he was okay. I've had to learn how to, now it's automatic, but I did go through a season where I had to learn how to express myself without hurting the other person, being careful of my words and saying it so that I get my point across again without hurting them. And so, that took a season for me to get that down. And yeah, he's a safe place. And I had a moment so I could put my thoughts together and I could come out and I could articulate what it is I needed.
Like I look at some of the essentials of a marriage, right? And there's so
Mhm.
many. Like some people say there's six, some people say there's eight. But I think what a lot of people will agree on is that time, honesty, and trust
Yes.
of the person is necessary. And that is not only when things are good, it's also when things are bad for one
Mhm.
person or both.
Right.
And I wonder why so many people miss that in the trauma. Because as you mentioned, you're feeling something like, okay, I need to take a moment here, which is perfectly fine. First step, understand you're going through, right? The second is to go to the person, give them the opportunity because
Yeah.
it could essentially be that they're all that you need and they're more than what you need. And you're like,
Right.
okay, we got this together. Like
Right.
it's so hard for me to understand why there's that hesitation unless the person has shown over time that they don't want to even hear about your problems. And that'll be a whole
Right.
separate conversation, right? Because then you're asking, okay, if I can't come to you, if I can't share with you, can't be with you, is this strictly a sexual relationship? Then you don't necessarily need to be married
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
point, right? Like, can do sometime, and I'm gonna ask you since from a woman's perspective, do people sometimes confuse the type of relationship that they have, and that's why maybe they can't go to the person with their trauma?
Well, think about this. If you haven't experienced trauma and I come to you and I start telling you about my trauma, it's hard for you to understand, right? And it's hard for you to have, I just to understand it. And this is a great example because my husband was not traumatized. Like he had a great childhood. So I call him my normal. He's my safe normal, right? And to start sharing this stuff. Because when you start telling these stories, they're so horrific. And when you're someone like you or, me or my husband who wouldn't do that to somebody else, it's hard to imagine that there's people out there that do this stuff, you know? And so there's a lot of shame in trauma. There's a lot of shame. And I had Tim Fletcher on he's a complex trauma expert. He's amazing. And I asked him, I said, what is that shame? We were the ones who were abused, and yet we're the ones carrying the shame. And he described it perfectly. Shame is the set of beliefs that you're believing. It's beliefs. And that's true because as I've worked through my healing, I have hardly any shame anymore. You hear the stories I tell, and that's because my belief about myself is different. I have a different belief about myself, and so that's the part that's hard with partners, especially when one is traumatized and has gone through trauma and the other one hasn't. My husband, I don't expect my husband to understand what it's like to go through, but he listens to me. He listens to me and he supports me. And that's all he can do. And that's all I want from him. I don't expect him to fix it. So I guess my point in this is what probably interferes a lot in relationships when one has been traumatized, or even both, is shame. Shame will shut them down.
Shame to share with their partner instead of sharing with because they're still
Mhm.
going to share with someone. So why is there would there be more shame sharing with their partner than maybe a stranger?
Well, this is interesting because when I did my workshop before, I had one lady that came through and she was in her 70s. She had never shared her story, not even with her husband of 50 something years. So there's statistics out there as well. And one of them is women who are sexually abused, on average, it's between the ages of 13 and 17 years old. And it takes them 4 decades before they'll say anything to anybody. That is crazy. They are suffering for 40 years before they open their mouth and tell anybody that they've been sexually abused. And what if this is one of the thoughts that goes to their heads. What if I go and tell my husband I was sexually abused? What's he going to do with that? He's going to look at me different. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but that's the truth. And there's a lot of shame in that. This woman did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong. She was violated. And then she's got to live with all this stuff and then try and have a healthy relationship.
Is
Or a man.
then
It happens to me.
or man, right?
It's even worse for men. It's hard for me to say that, but it's been my experience for men. They have a whole nother different dynamic that they have to deal with when it comes to the sexual abuse.
Yeah, I'm looking at it as I agree. There is a shame, especially when it's that type of crime. Like if it's an abuse
Yes.
that's sexual
Yeah.
in nature. And then I had a few people, psychologists, who are dealing with that, and they mentioned a part of that shame, like you shared, is very true. And a lot of people, when they go to someone the very first time, they're made to feel worse
Yeah. Yeah.
because they don't get because they usually go to because a lot of the abuse is maybe is someone they know or known to the family, and when they
Right.
try to raise it to the family's not
Oh,
supportive in
yeah.
the way that need to be supportive.
Mhm.
So now they're thinking, I've been abused when I was defenseless as a child. A lot of
Mhm.
times that's what happens. I went to who I was told is supposed to be my protector, my family. They
Right.
didn't protect me.
Mhm.
So why would I think a stranger 10, 15, 20 years down the road is going to give me what my family couldn't give me when I
Right.
didn't have the power to protect myself?
Right. 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 I walked around not feeling safe ever, ever. I had to take care of myself. And that was a belief that I took on again when I was around 11, when one of the times my brother attacked me, and he attacked me in front of people, and nobody did anything. They sat there and watched it. And I remember standing up going, what the hell? Like, is anybody going to do anything about this? Did you guys just watch this? Is anybody doing it? They're not. Okay. And the belief I took right there was, okay, nobody else is going to protect me. I got to take care of myself. So you get very independent and you do isolate and you get very independent and you figure out real quick, especially in a situation like that where you are abused and you go to the people that are supposed to protect you and they don't believe you, or they just say, oh, don't, it's okay, you're fine, don't talk about it, which is super common. Who are you going to turn to? Remember, this is children, and this is us as adults can't even wrap our head around this, right? Imagine a child whose little brain I mean, they're just trying to figure out life right now. And they get this big, heavy stuff thrown on them. They can't.
I couldn't imagine. And you mentioned it perfectly through your guest on your show. It's a set of beliefs that you believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
You begin to believe that, okay, no one's going to protect me. I need to protect myself. So now there's this wall,
Right, right.
you're
Oh, yeah,
guarded.
definitely a wall. That wall got me in trouble a lot too. That wall got me in trouble a lot because I remember I would keep walking up against it. And all I'd see is this big wall. And I'm like, okay, I know I need to get through this wall somehow, right? This huge wall, or I need to get around it, but I can't figure it out. And I would butt up against it. And what I realized later is all I needed to do really was just turn around.
And
That's
then
all
the
I needed
problems were
to do.
solved.
Problem solved. Problem solved. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Lisa, as we close, give us some advice how those who are experiencing trauma, they want to get on a recovery journey. What's the first couple of steps that maybe in general that they can do to make sure they at least start the path to recovery and healing?
Well, my first recommendation is absolutely look for a trauma therapist for yourself. And it might take you it's okay. And it might take you a couple therapists. It's okay. Remember, you're interviewing them, they're there to support you. And so you do need to feel comfortable is not the quite word, but safe. You need to feel safe with them, that you can trust them. That's the biggest thing. Give yourself a lot of grace, because what us survivors do, especially when we haven't been through any kind of healing, is we're really hard on ourselves. Really hard on ourselves. There's a lot of negative self talk and thoughts. And so just give yourself a lot of grace and make sure you have a good support system around you. And that doesn't have to be a lot of people, and it usually isn't. It's usually just a small handful of people that will be there for you and just support you. Because sometimes there's nothing that person can do but just sit with you. Just sit with you.